Welcome back. We're on episode 4 of the RPM podcast. We have another very special guest. All our guests are special. But we have a very special guest joining us. Not a driver, but he's been in the industry for, 30-something years, right?
30-something years, and I don't know if I'd say special guest. I think I was the last option of the day.
No. But we have a very special guest. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody?
I'm Brandon Smith, the general manager of Rands, and as Carson said, been in the industry since about 96 and variety of positions, but happy to be here at Rands.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what I like to do when we start, I like to ask everybody the same thing. Why trucking? Why did not everybody when they're in elementary school, want to be an astronaut, a doctor, a cop? Nobody says they want to work in transportation. So how did you end up here?
And I didn't either. When I was in elementary school, I wanted to be a pilot, and somehow I missed the mark there. No, my father was in this industry. My grandfather was in this industry, and I don't want to say it's in our blood, but it's kind of in our blood. And so when I was a sophomore in high school, my parents told me they wanted me to get a job. Didn't care what it was, but had to have a job. And I just did not want to go the fast food route or the retail route. So I asked my dad if I could get a job at Martin, and he said, sure. I was supposed to start in the shop, and I got pulled into customer service, and I kind of never left.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until about my sophomore year in high school that I realized it's what I wanted to do for a career, but been kind of doing it since high school. And I remember some of my first memories. My dad used to take me to the office on Saturdays, and I used to sit on the floor and kind of play around with the computers, and kind of been around trucking my entire life. So
that's cool. That's really cool. You said you started in customer service, and you said you've had so many different positions. What positions have you held? You said you started customer service. Now you're at the GM level. Where have you been in between those?
Sure. So, like I said, started off in customer service. I was an assistant, just making appointments and scheduling loads and doing a lot of the admin side of it. I've been a fleet manager. I was a planner, customer service. Probably where I really started focusing on building a career in the industry. I was on site at 3M and General Mills and a few other Fortune 500 companies, and being able to see transportation from the shipper side was pretty instrumental in kind of helping me decide this is really where I wanted to go career-wise long-term. But then I've spent time managing dedicated, regional, over-the-road fleets, and then also have spent quite a bit of time in the pricing side of the world. So managing the kind of the commercial side, pricing, contract management strategy, kind of lane design, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And kind of everything in between, right? So there's a lot that goes into that operations and kind of sales pricing, contract management side. And I think I've done pretty much every role kind of across those two groups.
Yeah, that's interesting. You said you started with Martin, right? Back in what year did you start?
96.
96. You started with Martin. And the thing is, they have 3,000 or so trucks.
I think when I was there, they had about 2,800.
2,800. And here at Rands, we only have about 150. So you've been at one of the top of the line, and now I won't want to say we're bottom of the line, but we're definitely a smaller company in terms of size and people and trucks and freight. So what are kind of the main differences you see there compared to somewhere that's got so many more resources, and then us where we're a little bit smaller, a little bit more family connected?
Sure. So there's quite a few differences. One thing I would like to just call out, and I think people make this mistake, and I did it as well, right? So I've worked at Martin Transport and Rail Transport. Rail has about 2,000 trucks. Martin has about 2,800 trucks. And, we're sitting at 150. So to me, sometimes we feel very small.
Right.
With that being said, though, we're in the top 1% of our industry by size, right?
Yeah,
We're
that's
so
crazy.
fractured. There's so many trucking companies in our country that have 10 or fewer trucks. In fact, that's the vast majority of trucking companies. So we are actually incredibly large when you look at the entire fleet. But to that point, right, there are obviously some carriers that are much, much larger. I think the biggest difference that I see is you go from a large carrier to a small carrier. At those large carriers, everyone has a singular focus, right? So when I was a planner, right, I planned a very specific, very limited region, and I had a very limited ability to impact kind of anybody outside of that one planning role, right? When I managed pricing, it was truly pricing. It wasn't the execution. It wasn't the acceptance or the relationship. It was just the pricing piece of it. When you come to a smaller carrier, you've got to wear a lot more hats, right? So, sitting in the GM role, I'm involved in operations. I'm involved in pricing and lane flow and strategy. So all that stuff I've done before kind of helps build. And what I find is that when I'm working with people at Rands, again, smaller carrier, there's a lot better understanding of the rest of the operation and the organization as opposed to kind of what I experienced at some of these bigger carriers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess, yeah, it's crazy to me that, like you said, majority of trucking companies are 10 trucks or less, and it's a lot of these owner operators or mom and pop shops. And when you put that into perspective, it really does show kind of the vastness of the industry and how much difference there is just from one company to the next.
Absolutely, it's huge.
Yeah. What now? You've been doing this a long time. So what have you
trying
seen?
to say I'm old?
No. I'm just saying you got a lot of experience. No. I'm trying to figure out. I asked our drivers a lot, kind of the big changes they see out on the road. They talk a lot about the ELDs and a lot of the technology in these trucks that have evolved and made, for better or worse, made their lives easier or harder. So what have you seen from the operation side from back in the 90s to now? What has changed?
Probably the biggest is there's a lot less relationship between our operations group and our customers. When I was a customer service person, we had email, but it was, and I hate saying this, it was still kind of in the early days of email. We still use faxes. EDI, which is the primary way in which most customers and carriers get freight. It's an electronic exchange of data. We had that back then, but it was, I bet probably 10% of our freight came over that way. Most of the freight that I booked, a customer would call me and say, hey, I got 10 loads for you. And I would literally write down the information, right? And you get it wrong and you have a big problem, right? There's nothing to look back on. It's just purely a conversation. But one of the things that I spent a lot of my time doing as a customer service person, I had to have enough freight for all my trucks every day. And I spent probably 6 out of my 8 or 9 hours in the office every day calling customers. What do you have? What do you have coming up? How can I get more freight, right? There was a lot more solicitation and relationship in this, where it feels like a lot of that's gone away, right? We've replaced a lot of those relationships and phone calls with a data exchange. And I don't know if it's made us better. I don't think it has.
Do you think that is a positive or a negative? Because to me, I think the relationship building is a positive. I think if you can build relationships with not just customers, but maybe a one-off broker here and there, then you can start to develop a rapport with them. I feel like that's a positive.
Yeah, I think we've really tried to boil, and I don't want to stereotype, because not everyone has done this, but I think in large part, a lot of our industry has really tried to make what in my mind should be a long-term relationship into a transactional experience. Back in the day, again, now I do sound old, but back in the day, right, it wasn't just about rate. It was about the service and the understanding of the business. Right. Where today, a lot of times it feels like a lot of those freight decisions are really made on who has the lowest rate.
Right.
And I just personally think there's a lot more that goes into it. And having worked at, again, 2 large carriers, now a little bit of a smaller carrier, we all bring something different to the table.
Right.
And there are things that we can do that some of those bigger carriers can't do. And there's some things that the bigger carriers can do that we can't. And it all kind of goes besides rate, which is just a single number on a piece of paper that doesn't really necessarily tell the story sometimes.
Right. What are some of those things you think that we have the benefit of since we're smaller, but at the same time, we're also a very large trucking company? So what kind of benefit do you think that has for our customers when they work with us compared to some of these larger companies that maybe they do only care about the bottom dollar?
Sure. I think, and from my benefit, the one thing I will say, that the 2 carriers that I have spent a lot of time at, they're great carriers, right? They really are good companies. So I don't think it's so much a matter of, us just being better or them being worse. I think it's culture and kind of where you just see differences in terms of scope. One thing that I think we do that is significantly different than the other big companies in the in the country, we're small enough that every customer in our portfolio is very important to us. They fill a specific need or niche or whatever. Where I think at large companies, sometimes those smaller customers just fly under the radar. They don't get a lot of attention. And, we have some very, very big kind of enterprise customers that ship all over the nation for us, and they touch every part of our operation. And we have some other customers that we might do a load a month for, but those customers are just as important to us and we look at them as growth opportunities, and we care about their business and want to learn about their business. And sometimes I think those bigger companies just don't have the ability to do that.
Yeah, I guess that makes a lot of sense though. You touched on culture a little bit, and that's something that here at Rands is pretty big for us. If you just want to touch on kind of what our culture is compared to maybe the norm of the industry, and
Sure.
kind of how we operate.
And this is something that I struggled with when I first got here. Not that I thought it was bad. There are a couple things that we did that were just so different than what I saw from my previous experience that it took me a little bit to understand the value, which I think is probably a good thing, right? It's not something that is just obvious that everybody does. The first is we really, and I know that every company says this, and having worked at other companies, I don't think they always understand what they mean when they say this, but we really treat our drivers very much like any other employee at our company. And one good example of this, when I first came here, I did not like our recruiting process at all. I really struggled with it. I kind of wish Ryan was here, because Ryan and I have talked about this a lot. When we hire an office employee or a maintenance employee, traditionally we do a phone screen, and then we bring them in for an in-person interview or a Zoom interview, depending on where they live, right? And we have multiple people involved and multiple people offering opinions and asking questions and doing all that. A lot of trucking companies, when you hire a driver, totally different process, right? You talk to a recruiter, and that recruiter makes the decision, and that's kind of it. But when we look at our office employees and our shop employees, we want to make sure that there's a cultural fit, and we want to make sure that they understand what they're getting into, right, and that we sell ourselves to them as much as they sell themselves to us.
Yeah.
Why would we have a different procurement on that process, right? So our driver hiring is pretty much exactly the same as our office employees. And that took me a while to get my head wrapped around, and I am 100% converted on that. I believe that is the right way to do it. And then the other thing that we do, that it's such a subtle, small change, we really do not ever refer to a driver by truck number.
No. And
again, coming from the other places that I've worked, that's really how most companies operate, right? It's the truck, because it's the thing that shows up in terms of the system and the load and all of that data. So when they plan and they dispatch, it's by truck number. We don't do it that way, and we do it, by the driver's name. I've noticed a real shift for me, when we have planners talking about, okay, this load is kind of ugly, it's not really going to work great, it's going to make a driver sit or wait. It's a lot harder to put a driver on that load when you're talking about the person, and you're not talking about the truck. I think when you talk about the truck, you dehumanize the experience, and we really don't do that. It's subtle, it's small, but it makes a huge difference. I think that's the biggest shift that I've seen, and you can kind of see that all through our organization. You see a driver walk in our office, and everyone calls him by name. I've been at some big companies where you see a driver walk in, and they'll walk right up to their fleet manager's desk, and only that fleet manager knows who they are. Nobody else does. And it's and I get it. Big companies, it's tough to do and make this stuff personal, but it's important, and it makes a big difference.
Yeah, 100%. I just kind of want to echo what you said with the hiring process. When I got onboarded at Rands here back in January, I started with Chad Melville with the driver. We were in the same orientation. We did the same. It was the same process. And I thought that was really unique. Not unique. I don't know. I guess I've only been in trucking. This is my only trucking job.
I would say it's unique. I agree.
Yeah, it was not interesting, but it was just pretty cool to see that they kind of consolidated everything, and like you said earlier, treated everyone the same. I mean, there's no distinction like, since you're an office employee, you're better than if you're a shop or a driver. Like, there's none of that, which I think is really awesome.
So I think one of the big challenges in our industry, so speaking of orientation, right? So that was 2 days, right, to get you involved. How long did it take you to really understand and fit into our culture?
The culture or the industry? The culture.
Forget the industry.
The culture right away. The culture was like immediate. Within the first week, I was like, this place is
First
awesome.
Week though, right? I think that's the important thing. And I think this is something that our industry misses. So it took you a week to kind of get ingrained in the culture, but you're in the office every day.
Yeah.
You think about how we onboard drivers, right? Driver comes in, they go through orientation, day, maybe 2, and they're in the truck and gone. But somehow we expect them to understand and just fit into our culture in that time frame. I think a lot of trucking companies punt on that. And instead of having the driver fit into the corporate culture, they have a completely separate culture for the drivers.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think that comes across almost condescending, right? And
I never even thought of it like that.
I think that's a challenge to get a driver on board where they're not going to be in the office every day, but then have them understand and kind of work within the culture. I think when you do that, you've got to have the entire company behind that and working with the drivers to make sure they understand who we are, but more importantly, we understand who they are.
Right. And I think again, shout out Ryan. Wish Ryan was here. I think Ryan does a great job of that with the taking them to lunch on their first day, introducing them, giving them a tour on their first day, introducing them to everybody by name, talking a little bit about where they're from, who they are, where they're coming from, what they like to do. I think he does, not just Ryan, but the whole team does a really good job of kind of making him, like you said, introduce him to the culture, introduce him to the people, and getting them more comfortable with us and who we are, which is awesome. I think more companies should do that. I
think that's one of the things that always surprises me a little bit when I meet with new drivers. One of the things that I hear all the time from them is, everybody I've met with told me if I have a problem or an issue, pick up the phone and call. Mm-hmm. And a lot of companies really want to push away from that. They want, again, kind of like we talked about, the big change in operations, right? Going more digital and more digital communication. I think you're seeing that a lot with drivers as well. And I would still rather, if we have somebody who has a concern or an issue or a problem, pick up the phone. Let's have a 5-minute conversation on it versus a 2-hour conversation over email or text or whatever. Right?
No kidding.
I just think that's been a big change in our industry, and I don't think it's made us better.
Yeah, no, I also think we do a great job of that. Like, I've seen drivers come into your office, into Nikki's office, into my office. If they have a problem or an issue, that they have no problem coming and talking. I think that goes back to the culture. They feel comfortable with us. They feel like they can come and bring suggestions. I had one of our drivers called me yesterday. He had a suggestion for our safety newsletter we send out every week. He's like, I think you should do this, this, and this. I was like, I love it. If you have more suggestions, bring them on. So I really like the culture that we've built here, and I think we do a good job with it. So.
The other thing I just throw out there on that, it's great to hear, right? I mean, we're very proud of our safety record and our safety culture, but the fact that we send out, a newsletter on safety, I think a lot of companies do it. But not only are drivers reading it, they're finding ways to help improve.
That's my big thing. I told him, I was like, hey, don't. He apologized for it. He's like, hey, I don't want to disrespect. I'm like, no. I was like, hey, first of all, you're reading it. I was like, that means you're looking at it. And 2, it means you're analyzing it enough to make suggestions and wanting to get better. So I was like, don't ever apologize for making a suggestion. I was like, never do that.
100%.
Yeah. No, I think that's really cool. So we talked a lot about trucking. Let's talk a little bit about what you like to do outside of work. I know you like to kayak a lot. You just went on a camping trip.
Like to kayak a lot. We, wife and I try to go pretty much every weekend if we can get on the water. You wouldn't know it by looking at me today, but I used to be a long distance runner. Since coming to Rands and putting in a few hours here and there, kind of giving that up a little bit. Want to get back into that, but
I don't.
You don't?
I have no interest in running now. I'm good.
We can get you out
there.
We can get you on the trail, do a 50-miler.
Not 50 miles.
50 miles. That was my longest. 51 miles was my longest.
51 miles.
Yeah, we can get you out there.
Could do 5.
And then besides that, we have 4 dogs, which is 4 more dogs than I think I ever actually wanted, but I wouldn't change it. That's another thing. You've seen the social media side of the world, right?
But we love showing off our dogs.
Rands loves our dogs.
We do love our pets, man.
It's kind of nice working in an environment where not only, it's the leadership. Bill brings his dogs in, periodically, and it's nice working at a company where the owner feels that way.
Yeah.
But I think every employee at our company is open to that and likes the concept and stuff.
Absolutely. So I was gonna say, every time a driver comes in here, 95% of them have dogs with them, and it's awesome. Our Carly customer service, she has treats in her desk, so whenever they come in here, they always run up and they always get their treat. They always got to get their treat.
We do. I work in Ladysmith primarily, but we have an office dog there, and typically every office dog that we have there, they make a trip upstairs into dispatch to meet Becca, because Becca keeps treats for them.
They do make a beeline. I was up there on Monday, and Ollie was in there, and as soon as Becca got in, just up the stair immediately.
Yeah. The only time those dogs are dangerous at all is when they get in the morning, and if you are in their way, they are running you over.
You're not wrong.
No.
You're not wrong. Oh, man. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of the future of not just Rands, but kind of the industry. Do you think, I've seen a lot with like the autonomous trucks, and there's a lot going on in Congress right now. Do you think with the changes that are going, are they good, bad? Where do you stand on some of those?
Neither. I don't think any of the changes are inherently good or bad. Mm-hmm. I really think there's a lot of hype right now around the AI side of the world.
Yeah,
and
100%.
obviously a lot of conversation about autonomous trucks. I would be surprised if, and I know this is probably going to be counter to what a lot of people think, I would be surprised if autonomous trucks are a really, truly big add of capacity in my lifetime in this industry. I think Congress has yet to really weigh in on that. And, I think when you look at the work that our drivers do and you look at what autonomous trucks are doing today, there's just a pretty major mismatch on that still, right? You look at delivering inner city Chicago, right? Autonomous trucks are not doing that right now. Backing into tricky docks on the East Coast, they're not doing that right now. Running in inclement weather, right? Autonomous trucks do not run in snow, right? So you look at what they are doing, right? They're picking up highway adjacent location to highway adjacent location. So they're running, Houston to Dallas, right? Very, for the most part, fairly decent weather. Very simple parts of the business. Not that any part of driving is simple, but they have really tried to tackle the simplest parts of that
I guess
job.
that's a fair place to start. I mean, you want to start somewhere simple, easy, figure out if it can do the main parts of what you're trying to have it do.
But to go from that to backing into a dock in Chicago, that feels like a huge leap to me, and I think we are worlds away from that. I also think at the end of the day, when and I think this is one of the big issues in our industry right now, I think, me personally, having worked in the industry and knowing our drivers and understanding, I'm 100% more confident having a driver in an autonomous vehicle just in case something goes wrong than not.
100%. I saw something the other day. I don't remember. It's on the internet, so I'll take it with a grain of salt. But they're rolling out they're starting to put them in with drivers. I think it's a couple hundred. And then they're going to, after a couple months, they're going to do fully autonomous. And I'm like, I'm kind of in the same. I don't care if they're autonomous. I want somebody in the seat. 100%. I don't want to be going down the road and see an 80,000 pound truck with nobody there to control it if something goes wrong.
100%. So. And I think that's the challenge for me. I don't want to come across like I'm anti-technology. I'm not. I use AI quite a bit and have found quite a few uses for it in my 100%. Day-to-day life. I think AI is best though when it is adding value to what we do, not taking away from what we do.
I 100% agree.
And I have not found anything that we use AI for that is good at replacing a human. It's just good at making us better.
Yeah.
And I think there are times where, again, you look at that straight highway driving. If we can take that off of our driver's plates so we can have them, available and fresh when we're in traffic, there might be value there. But again, you still have to have that driver in the truck, right?
100%.
So I don't think the autonomous piece is bad per se. I think though, just with the assumption that that's just somehow going to replace drivers someday is misguided and wrong.
100%. I don't think we should do. I don't want to go down the road and see a truck without a driver.
I don't know. That makes me nervous.
I don't want to see that.
And again, this is probably something too that if you ask the average motorist, they're going to have a different opinion on this. I know our drivers.
And,
I think one thing that is crazy to me, and is one of the biggest issues in our industry. You talk to the average motorist, right? And they're going to have a perception of trucks which probably doesn't marry up to reality.
Right.
We measure ourselves and we measure our drivers in terms of millions of miles accident free, right? Yeah. We have drivers that have 1, 2, 3, 4 million miles accident free. I don't know anybody who has driven their entire life without having an accident, and we don't drive close to millions of miles, right? So it's such a amazing feat, and there are a lot of drivers out there who have achieved it, right? So again, I just feel more comfortable with the driver in the seat.
You said something that kind of piqued my interest. You talked about kind of what other non-truckers and more the general population would think. What is some general misconceptions that you hear a lot of? Because I know you go to a lot of these networking events. You're out in the community a lot. What are some common things you hear from people that are just have a completely wrong opinion or just completely misled about the trucking industry?
The two that jump out at me the most. The first is that, driver's job is easy, right? I think a lot of people equate what a truck driver does to something similar to their morning commute.
Right. It is
not. And what I always tell them, and the easiest way to dispel that myth, Go to any boat landing during the summer and watch people try to back their boats into
Yeah.
the water. A lot of people can't do it. Now imagine doing that with a 53-foot trailer that you can't see behind, right?
Yep.
And if you ever watch a driver, and we have hundreds of them that can do this, but when I'm sitting in my office and I watch drivers back trailers into our loaded line,
Yep.
the fact that they can get those things in there perfectly straight, an inch from either side,
Yeah.
and it takes them seconds.
Yeah,
Right?
right. I was gonna say yesterday I think Justin was out here. I was out filming a video, and he comes back. He pulls it around, and within 2 minutes, he has the thing parked perfectly straight. Like gets out. He's like, "Hey, how's it going?" I'm like,
Absolutely.
"Yeah, just a pro, just a pro." I mean,
And people miss that, right? They don't understand, and that's just one aspect of the job, right? I mean, and there's
yeah.
so much more to it than that. It's trip planning and knowing you have to hit a specific appointment 2 days from now across the country, right? It's making sure that you're safe during that trip, right? And you're protecting the people around you. And there's so much that goes into it, but just the backing alone, right? I don't think. Yeah, and I'll be honest, I've worked in trucking most of my life, and I could not do even close to what our drivers do. The other misconception, and I think it's a really common one, is that there's little to no technology in trucking. I think there are a lot of people out there that really think trucking is just the drivers on the road driving up and down the road, and they are the biggest part by for sure. But there is so much technology that goes into our industry today, whether it's in the truck, right, whether it's in the office. There's just it's a really high tech field, and I think the average person in our country has no concept of that.
Yeah. Well, we're getting to the end here. I know you like to tell stories. I want to hear over the last handful of years. I won't make you feel old. What's like what is the wildest thing? The number one story that comes to your mind that you can appropriately tell?
Well, that limits a lot of them. We've had a lot. That's one thing that I will say about our industry. Everybody has at least one or two stories, some of which, as you say, probably shouldn't be told, and
should never see the light of day.
Should not. Probably I have two really quick.
Yeah, go for it.
We had in a former life at a company, we had a driver one time send a message in late at night. He got laid over in Vegas and said, "I want a progressive slot. I just won $3 million. I hate to do this, but your keys are at the fuel island. I'm out."
No way.
Yep, won a progressive slot and just walked away. I'll be honest with you. You never want to have a driver abandon a truck out there. I don't know if I really blame this guy.
I can't. Right? Yeah, I feel like I would understand.
100%.
I would be like, "Yeah, you want? Yeah, I get it.
Yeah,
I get it." That's crazy.
And then probably, this isn't necessarily a story, but it's probably one of the best lessons I ever learned in this industry.
Let's do it.
And I do have to clean this one up a little bit.
All right, well, that's fine. As long as you're cleaning it up.
I was a kid. I was like 21 years old, and I was on site at 3M, and big company, right? Lot of kind of eyes and focus on you. I think at the time it was like a $10 million account for us, and so when we got there, we had some relationship issues we had to fix, and I think largely we got them fixed, right? So it was a weird department to work in, though, because there were 10 people, 4 3M, 6 carrier reps. And the 6 carrier reps didn't work for 3M, but we worked with 3M really closely, right? So the gentleman who managed the department was a guy by the name of Frank Deerberger. And Frank was a great guy, right? But he was on the tail end of his career. So, pictures, I'm 21, he's in his 70s. And Frank had been doing this for a lot of years. He was a very grizzled veteran of our industry. And if I get to his age and have his knowledge and wisdom, I did okay.
Yeah, fair.
But anyway, he comes over one day and he says, "Smith, we got to talk to you about the service failure you had last night." And I'm a kid, granted, but I got frustrated. I mean, I was frustrated immediately, and I'll never forget. I turned around to him and said, "Frank," I said, "when I got here, our service was in the toilet, and we've got this thing turned around, and we've got to be close to 99% on time for you. Are you really going to bust my chops over a single service failure?" And I'll never forget this so long as I live. He looked at me, and Frank was about 5'0", right?
Okay.
So somehow Frank was always looking down at you, even though I was taller than him, about the only person on earth I'm taller than. And Frank looks down at me and says, "Kid, you got to learn this. But in this industry, you're only as good as the last load you hauled, and the last load you hauled, you screwed up. I have never forgotten that song. That I felt about an inch tall, and I took my beating, and we improved, and we got better.
That's all you can do, right?
But he's 100% true, right?
Yeah.
In our industry, you're only as good as your last load, and if you screwed up your last load, you got some atonement.
I love that. That's such a good lesson. I love that. Well, Brandon, I appreciate you coming on. It's been awesome.
Absolutely, and just want to throw out there for everyone listening, Carson and Ryan have done a phenomenal job here. Just thrilled to death with the fact that we've got this podcast up and going, and they're doing a great job. And can't wait to see what this looks like a year from now or 2 years from now. And
really excited.
Absolutely.
As we keep going and get better. Each week we just try to get a little bit better each time. So
absolutely,
I appreciate that. I'll let Ryan know that too. I'm sure he'll really appreciate it. So
Appreciate
thank you.
it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.